My sister demanded $650 per month in childless tax for her son at Thanksgiving. I smiled, pulled out my own invoices, and her marriage collapsed. My sister Madison Pierce asked that I pay her $650 per month in child support for my nephew Noah Pierce, since I did not have my own children, and hence owed financial assistance to family members who did. She openly referred to it as a childless tax, claiming that since I had selfishly decided not to reproduce, I was expected to financially assist those who were extending the family line. She made an official-looking paper headed Child Support Agreement for Non-Parents, and attempted to have me sign it at Thanksgiving dinner in front of the entire family. She claimed that women without children had been able to avoid contributing to the next generation for far too long, and it was time for childless aunts to pay their due share. Madison Pierce estimated that I should repay her $650 per month plus back wages from when Noah Pierce was born 8 years ago, totaling $48,500 in delinquent child support. She even threatened to send me to family court because I had neglected to pay my nephew's expenses. And any court would support a suffering mother over a selfish childless lady hoarding money. She informed everyone at dinner that I'd been freeloading on the family by not having children while expecting to have access to Noah Pierce without paying for his upbringing. She stated that childless persons who wish to have contact with nieces and nephews should pay child support in the same way as divorced parents do. When I laughed and said that wasn't how child support worked, Madison Pierce claimed I was discriminating against parents, and this was precisely the type of entitlement that childless adults demonstrated when they refused to support the children in their life. She said Noah Pierce was essentially my part-time child because I saw him frequently and took him places. So I provided some financial support for his existence. She really likened herself to a surrogate who had had a kid for me because I couldn't or wouldn't have my own, and since surrogates get paid, she should be as well. She threatened to prevent me from seeing Noah Pierce until I began paying monthly child support immediately. Madison Pierce spent $9,200 on cosmetic operations that year, but said she couldn't afford Noah Pierce's school supplies without my help. She stated that raising children was costly, and that childless adults should appreciate that their advantage of having discretionary wealth came with duties to family children. She actually sent me bills for half of Noah Pierce's expenses, including haircuts, clothing, and even snacks, claiming these were my share of shared custody fees. She informed Noah Pierce that I was his financial aunt, who was meant to pay for things but was being stingy with money that legitimately belonged to him. That's when I realized Madison Pierce needed to understand what paying support entailed. I began by preparing my own invoices for all of the babysitting I had done over the previous 8 years at the standard cost of $25 per hour. Madison Pierce owing me $36,000 for unpaid childcare services, which she had been freeloading while claiming I had not contributed. I sent her an official-looking paper labeled Childcare Services Past Due and requested urgent reimbursement for my efforts, which she had been stealing. When Madison Pierce stated that the family did not charge for babysitting, I responded that the family also did not charge child support. But here we were, with her new regulations. Next, I demanded Madison Pierce pay me support for everything I had sacrificed to be there for Noah Pierce. I compensated her for missed career chances when I took time off to care for him, lost pay from leaving work early for his school activities, and emotional labor compensation for coping with his tantrums. I developed spreadsheets demonstrating that she owed me $650 per month in living support for the sacrifices I had made to be an involved aunt. I informed our family that Madison Pierce had been abusing my free work for years, providing little to my life in exchange. For Christmas, I handed Madison Pierce an invoice for the 8 years of gifts I'd given Noah Pierce, stating that if she wanted child support, she needed to compensate me for any voluntary donations I'd made. I added every birthday present, Christmas gift, odd item, and ice cream cone I'd ever purchased for him, along with interest calculated at credit card rates. Madison Pierce owing me $18,400 for items she took without payment. I told her she couldn't have it both ways, demand future assistance while retaining previous donations. The true justice arrived when I began informing everyone that Madison Pierce was charging me to visit my nephew as if he were a rented child. I revealed to our parents, relatives, and her friends that Madison Pierce had set up a pay-to-play system in which family members had to pay monthly payments to establish interactions with Noah Pierce. People were outraged that she was effectively selling access to her child and using him as a subscription service. Her husband learned about the child support demands and was embarrassed that Madison Pierce was attempting to extort money from me using their kid. Ethan Pierce grabbed Madison Pierce's arm right there in my parents' kitchen and dragged her down the hallway where they believed no one could hear them. His face resembled a tomato, and the vein in his forehead protruded like it does when he is angry. Madison Pierce tried to tear her arm away, but Ethan Pierce grabbed it tight and said something fierce that made her eyes widen. I feigned to assist Mom clean the dessert plates while everyone else became engrossed in their phones or began talking loudly. The weather. Madison Pierce was flailing her hands around, attempting to explain herself, but Ethan Pierce just shook his head and pointed to the front door. She responded with something that caused him to close his eyes, as if counting to 10. He then uttered something that caused her face become pale. They returned to the dining room, and Madison Pierce refused to look at anyone, while Ethan Pierce informed my parents that they needed to go immediately because something had come up. Mom looked concerned and asked if everything was all right, but Ethan Pierce grabbed their jackets and almost forced Madison Pierce out the door without saying goodbye to Noah Pierce properly. My phone rang at 7:30 the next morning, and Ethan Pierce's name appeared on the screen. His voice sounded scratchy, as if he had been awake all night and perhaps cried a bit. He apologized profusely for what Madison Pierce attempted to do, and he swore on his life that he had no knowledge she was plotting this insane child support scheme. He informed me he sat up until 3:30 a.m., poring over every bank account and credit card bill they had after I left for Thanksgiving dinner. That's when he discovered the $9,200 in charges from the upscale cosmetics shop downtown that Madison Pierce always drives by and peeks at. He said Madison Pierce told him the payments were for Noah Pierce's school fees and new winter clothing, but he now realized she had been lying to him for months. His voice trembled when he asked if I could email him copies of all the invoices I had created, because he wanted to know what Madison Pierce was doing behind his back. I promised him I'd email everything to him within an hour, and he thanked me 5 times before disconnecting up. 3 days later, I met Ethan Pierce for lunch at a coffee shop near his workplace. He looked terrible with dark circles under his eyes, and his shirt wasn't even properly ironed. I took my laptop and opened all of the spreadsheets I had produced, which showed 8 years of babysitting at $25 per hour, as well as every birthday and Christmas gift with receipts. All the times I left work early to pick up Noah Pierce from school, as well as the whole history of Madison Pierce's requests, dating back to that initial text message 3 months ago. Ethan Pierce's hands trembled as he scanned through the figures, which totaled more than $36,000 in free childcare and presents. He kept comparing Madison Pierce's cosmetic treatment dates to the times she emailed me about being unable to afford Noah Pierce's field trip costs or new sneakers. He acknowledged to working extra weekend shifts at the hospital for the last year because Madison Pierce kept stating they couldn't make ends meet and needed more money. He discovered that all of the additional money he made went right into Madison Pierce's face rather than their son's necessities or their savings. He buried his head in his hands and stated he felt like an idiot for not noticing what was going on right in front of him. 4 days after Thanksgiving, I was preparing supper in my apartment when someone began hammering on my door, loud enough to startle my neighbor's dog. I peeked through the peephole and saw Madison Pierce standing there, arms crossed, her face hot and angry. I opened the door, and she forced her way into my living room without being requested. She began ranting about how I was attempting to destroy her marriage by giving Ethan Pierce confidential information and turning her own spouse against her. I remained cool and informed her that the bills were not private because she had provided me official-looking paperwork beforehand. So I merely answered with my own official-looking documentation proving what she owed me. She yelled that I was being petty and nasty and that I had no right to go behind her back with Ethan Pierce. I stated I didn't go behind her back because Ethan Pierce phoned and asked me questions, and I simply replied honestly and with evidence, just as she had done to me at Thanksgiving dinner in front of the entire family. She got right in my face and told me that if her marriage failed, it would be entirely my fault for being a selfish witch who couldn't even assist her own sister. I looked her in the eye and told her that displaying her husband the identical invoices she gave me was ruining her marriage. Perhaps the issue wasn't me, but the falsehoods she had been telling him for months. Mom contacted me that afternoon, weeping so hard that I couldn't comprehend what she was saying at first. She eventually calmed down enough to inform me Madison Pierce had been at her house an hour earlier, alleging I was attempting to steal Noah Pierce away from her by poisoning Ethan Pierce's mind with falsehoods. Mom said Madison Pierce constantly claiming I was jealous of her lovely family and tried to tear them up because I was a bitter, childless lady who wanted to spoil everyone else's happiness. Mom confessed she didn't sure what to believe at first since Madison Pierce appeared so concerned and convinced. But then she remembered the strange child support document from Thanksgiving and knew Madison Pierce wasn't making sense. She stated that she loved both of her daughters, but Madison Pierce's demand for child support was entirely out of line, and she could not accept such behavior under any circumstances. I emphasized to Mom that I was not intending to take Noah Pierce somewhere or end Madison Pierce's marriage. I was just refusing to pay money I did not owe and telling Ethan Pierce the truth when he asked for it. I informed her Madison Pierce's marriage issues were her own fault for lying about money and attempting to extort family members, and they were the result of Madison Pierce's decisions, not mine. Later that week, my phone buzzed with a text from Madison Pierce that was so offensive that I had to read it twice to believe she sent it. She stated that I was prohibited from seeing Noah Pierce unless I apologized for breaking her marriage and promised to pay at least $275 per month in aunt support as a compromise. She responded, "If I really loved my nephew, I'd be willing to help support him financially instead of being a greedy witch hoarding my money." She called me selfish around 12 times in one paragraph and stated, "Noah Pierce deserved better than an aunt who valued money over family." I screenshotted the whole letter and gave it to Ethan Pierce without adding any comments of my own. He replied me in less than 7 minutes, claiming Madison Pierce didn't get to determine who saw Noah Pierce on her own, and she couldn't block me from my nephew's life for refusing to pay made-up expenses. He said he was going to bring Noah Pierce to see me this Saturday, regardless of what Madison Pierce said, since I was family, and Noah Pierce enjoyed spending time with me. Saturday morning, Ethan Pierce arrived at my flat with Noah Pierce, who jumped inside and gave me a big embrace as usual. But then he drew back and gazed up at me with sad, puzzled eyes, wondering why Mother was saying I didn't want to help care for him anymore. My stomach fell and I felt awful as I realized Madison Pierce had told Noah Pierce that I was abandoning him. I crouched down so we could be eye level and told him how much I loved him and how I would always be his aunt. I emphasized that adults do not charge one another money to be family since that is not how love works. Mommy had been perplexed about how family interactions are meant to operate. I mentioned that when grown-ups are agitated they make mistakes and say things that aren't true. But none of this was his fault, and nothing could ever erase how much I felt for him. He hugged me again, appeared to feel better, and asked if we could go to the park like we used to. I brought Noah Pierce to the park down the block while Ethan Pierce remained at my flat to make phone calls. We sat on the swings, and Noah Pierce began discussing how Mother and Daddy had been bickering a lot at home recently. He stated he could hear them shouting at night after he went to bed, which worried him because they had never fought like that before. He told me that his mother kept telling him that I was selfish and cruel, but he couldn't understand why because I'd always been good to him, taking him places he enjoyed and buying him ice cream. I gently pushed his swing and assured him that the adults were working on some issues that had nothing to do with him and were not his job to resolve. I told him that regardless of what occurred between the adults, I would always love him and want to spend time with him since he was my favorite nephew in the entire world. He grinned a little and said I was his favorite aunt, which made sense given I was his only aunt, and we laughed together. 3 weeks after Thanksgiving, my phone called with a number I did not know. When I responded, a lady called Brooke Chandler stated she was Madison Pierce's best friend and needed to talk to me about everything that had happened. We decided to meet for lunch at a sandwich shop midway between our flats. Brooke Chandler was anxious when she sat down and began by stating she'd heard Madison Pierce's version of the story, but she had also spoken with my mother and some other family members, and she was now very concerned about Madison Pierce. She stated that Madison Pierce had been moaning to her about this childless tax proposal for months, but Brooke Chandler dismissed it as a way for her to relieve her financial stress. She stated she never dreamed Madison Pierce would try to get me to sign paperwork and pay real money. After hearing what truly happened over Thanksgiving and witnessing how Madison Pierce was acting today, Brooke Chandler expressed concern that Madison Pierce had lost touch with what was appropriate conduct and what was utterly out of line. Brooke Chandler leaned forward and offered me something about Madison Pierce that I didn't know. She claimed Madison Pierce spent hours every day on social media comparing herself to other mothers who appeared to have flawless life, families, and faces. Madison Pierce began buying costly clothes and scheduling cosmetic treatments to attempt to appear like the ladies she saw online, and she was spending far more money than she and Ethan Pierce had. Brooke Chandler claimed Madison Pierce had borrowed money from her and at least 3 other acquaintances in the previous year, usually stating Ethan Pierce was being frugal with home funds and that she needed assistance meeting Noah Pierce's basic expenditures. But Brooke Chandler found Madison Pierce had been lying about their financial position all along, using borrowed money to finance her image rather than her son's necessities. Brooke Chandler was very heartbroken when she claimed she loved Madison Pierce like a sister, but couldn't tolerate her extorting family members for money. And she truly believed Madison Pierce needed professional therapy to deal with her spending addiction and her distorted feeling of entitlement to what other people owed her. I thanked Brooke Chandler for being honest with me, and expressed my hope that Madison Pierce would get the treatment she required. After we finished lunch, I sat in my car for a bit, reflecting on what Brooke Chandler had said about Madison Pierce's social media fixation and her falsehoods to friends about needing money. It made me sad to see my sister had become so obsessed with comparing herself to phony, flawless lifestyles on the internet that she had convinced herself she deserved money from everyone around her. But I also understood it wasn't my responsibility to cure, and Madison Pierce had to face the repercussions of her actions before she could change. On the second Sunday in December, my parents held their weekly family supper as they always did. I arrived with a casserole dish, wondering if Madison Pierce would even be there or if she had left to avoid meeting me. She came with Ethan Pierce and Noah Pierce, but the moment she stepped in and saw me arranging meals on the dining room table, her entire expression changed. She picked a chair at the far end of the table, as far away from me as possible, and positioned Noah Pierce between her and Ethan Pierce, as if she needed a buffer. Throughout dinner, she kept making pointed remarks about how some people valued money over family relationships, and how selfish people always put themselves first. She added it was unfortunate when individuals forget that family members were expected to assist one another during difficult times rather than compete. My mother attempted to shift the subject by asking Noah Pierce about school, but Madison Pierce simply continued, stating out loud to no one in particular that she couldn't believe how cold some people could be to their own flesh and blood. Dad pressed his fork down hard enough that it clanked against his plate, and everyone became silent. He looked straight at Madison Pierce and told her to quit acting like a victim right now, since she was the one who turned this into a money issue by requesting that I pay her child support. His voice was harsh and weary as he reminded her that she had caused this situation via her absurd demands and manipulation. And now she had to accept responsibility rather than behaving as if everyone else was the problem. Madison Pierce's mouth dropped wide, as if she couldn't believe Dad was confronting her in front of everyone. She began to speak, but Dad raised his hand, indicating that he was not finished. He informed Madison Pierce that her treatment of me had been cruel and unjust, and he was tired of seeing her try to guilt-trip me for having limits. The tension in the room became so dense that I could hardly breathe. Noah Pierce began sobbing at the table because the parents were bickering. Ethan Pierce quickly rose up and led Noah Pierce outside to the backyard, while the rest of us remained in terrible quiet. Mom stepped over and placed her hand on Madison Pierce's arm, saying they wanted to have an open chat about what had happened. Her voice was trembling but resolute as she stated that for years, she had enabled Madison Pierce's victim mentality since it was easier than confronting her. She said that witnessing Madison Pierce try to manipulate me and poison Noah Pierce against me had finally made her realize how dysfunctional the family dynamics had become. Dad agreed and said he and Mom had thought about this matter a lot over the last 3 weeks and decided they weren't going to referee it anymore or put pressure on me to give in simply to maintain peace. Mom looked directly at Madison Pierce and told her that the child support demand was unreasonable, that her treatment of me had been harsh, and that she needed to accept responsibility for her actions, rather than blaming others for her issues. She stated that Madison Pierce's spending habits and entitlement issues were her responsibility, and the family could no longer pretend everything was normal when it plainly wasn't. Madison Pierce's face became hot, then white, and she shoved her chair back so forcefully that it grated across the floor. She began shrieking that the entire family had turned against her and chosen my side, without even attempting to comprehend her point of view. She claimed we'd all regret it, and she'd never forget how we ganged up on her while she was struggling. She marched toward the rear door, screaming for Ethan Pierce and Noah Pierce and announcing that they were going right now. Ethan Pierce returned inside, fatigued and disheartened, and picked up Noah Pierce's jacket without saying anything. Madison Pierce was already outside the front door, yelling at us that we had all chosen sides and ruined the family. The door slammed, and we heard their car start and drive away. Mom buried her face in her hands and sobbed quietly, causing her entire body to quiver. Dad pulled his chair closer and placed his arms over her. And they simply sat there clutching each other, looking older and tireder than I had ever seen them before. I felt a terrible shame settle in my chest. Even though I understood cognitively that I had not initiated the issue and had not made any unreasonable demands. Madison Pierce had caused the whole problem, but I still felt guilty for my parents sobbing and my family coming apart. Around 10 p.m. that night, my phone vibrated with a text from Ethan Pierce informing me that Madison Pierce had locked herself in their bedroom the moment they arrived home and refused to talk to him or come out. He claimed he attempted to talk to her through the door, but she just continued shouting that everyone hated her and no one understood what she was going through. His text stated that he had reached his breaking point because she refused to face reality or accept responsibility for whatever she had done. He stated that he was going to insist on marital and financial therapy. And if Madison Pierce wouldn't agree to both, he was willing to divorce since he couldn't raise Noah Pierce in an environment full of deception and created drama. He apologized for all Madison Pierce had put me through and expressed optimism that our family would ultimately recover from all of this devastation. I responded back, thanking him for being fair, and said that while I hoped things would work out, I understood if he needed to make difficult decisions to protect himself and Noah Pierce. The week before Christmas, Ethan Pierce arrived at my parents' house with Noah Pierce and 2 luggage, asking if they may stay in the guest room for a bit. Mom said yes right away and helped them settle in, while Dad and I exchanged worrisome looks in the living room. Ethan Pierce revealed that he had informed Madison Pierce that he was moving out temporarily until she agreed to get professional treatment, and Madison Pierce had absolutely lost it. He said she had shouted at him for hours about abandoning her and prioritizing everyone else above his wife. Within an hour of Ethan Pierce and Noah Pierce arriving at my parents' house, my phone began to ring with Madison Pierce's number. I responded, and she instantly began screaming so loudly that I had to hold the phone away from my ear. She shouted that I had ruined her family and taken her husband and son away from her. She said I had turned everyone against her and poisoned Ethan Pierce's mind, and now I'd gotten precisely what I wanted: to wreck her life. She was weeping and shouting at the same time, questioning how I could do this to her and why I despised her so much. I remained cool and informed her that Ethan Pierce had made his own decision based on her conduct, not anything I had done. I told her she could heal her marriage whenever she wanted by addressing her spending habits and entitlement issues, rather than blaming everyone else for the results of her own behavior. She called me every terrible term she could think of and then hung up on me. Christmas Eve dawned, and I was helping my mother prepare for our tiny party when the doorbell rang. Dad went to answer it and found Madison Pierce on the front porch, demanding to see Noah Pierce. Her screaming echoed throughout the home as she said that we were all guilty of parental alienation and threatened to call the police if we did not allow her to see her kid right now. She yelled about her motherly rights and accused us of snatching Noah Pierce and turning him against her. Dad remained strong at the doorway, barring her from entering, and informed her in a calm manner that she was welcome to visit Noah Pierce, but not if she was going to cause a scene or say negative things about family members in front of her son. He added that if she could calm herself and act like a responsible adult, she could come in and spend Christmas Eve with Noah Pierce. Madison Pierce's face collapsed, and she began weeping right there on the porch. And for the first time since this whole affair began, her sobs were genuine rather than contrived. Her shoulders trembled as she covered her face with her hands, crying as if something inside her had finally snapped. Mom approached the door, softly stroked Dad's arm, and then walked past him onto the porch. She gently placed her hand on Madison Pierce's back and invited her to come inside for some tea and conversation. Madison Pierce nodded without looking up and let Mom to lead her into the home. Mom led her to the kitchen and locked the door, while the rest of us gave them room. I could hear their conversations through the door but couldn't make out the words, so I kept myself busy helping Noah Pierce create cookies in the dining room. After nearly an hour, Mom emerged from the kitchen, exhausted but hopeful. She stated that Madison Pierce had agreed to see a therapist and get financial counseling if Ethan Pierce would consider returning home. She said Madison Pierce finally confessed she had a problem and needed assistance. Madison Pierce followed Mom out of the kitchen a minute later, appearing smaller, as if she had retreated into herself. Her eyes were red and swollen, and when she looked at me across the room, she simply looked away quickly rather than staring or saying anything harsh. When Ethan Pierce arrived downstairs, Mom softly informed him what Madison Pierce had consented to and asked if he would be willing to speak with her. He took a long look at Madison Pierce before saying he'd come home with Noah Pierce after the holidays, but only if Madison Pierce went through with therapy and counseling. He also stated he required her to send me a genuine apology for what she'd done. Madison Pierce nodded without argument, and her face remained down, as if she couldn't meet anyone's gaze. Mom stated she was going to take Madison Pierce to her house for a lengthier private conversation, and they both departed via the front door. After they left, Dad walked over and placed his hand on my shoulder, telling me how proud he was of how I handled the entire issue with respect and clear limits. He expressed regret that it took Madison Pierce's full collapse for him and his mother to finally stop tolerating her dysfunction, and that he wished they had confronted her conduct years ago, before it became so terrible. In early February, I noticed an envelope in my mailbox with Madison Pierce's handwriting on it. Inside was a letter written on standard notebook paper, with words crossed out and sentences redone many times. There were tear marks on the paper, which caused the ink to flow in some areas. The letter stated that she was sorry for requesting child support from me and for attempting to manipulate me and the entire family. She said that she had been dealing with feelings of inadequacy in comparison to all of the mothers she saw online who appeared to have ideal lives, flawless faces, and perfect everything. She agreed that spending $9,200 on cosmetic operations while stating she couldn't afford Noah Pierce's school supplies was unjustified and hypocritical. She stated her therapist was assisting her in seeing that she had been attempting to control other people because she felt so out of control in her own life. She responded that she was aware that she had injured me and destroyed our relationship, and that she understood if I needed time and distance before I could trust her again. She asked if we could try to carefully develop a connection for Noah Pierce's sake, as he missed me and continually asking when he might see me again. The letter concluded with her stating that she understood that actions were more important than words, and that she intended to focus on being the type of person who deserved to have family ties. I sat at my kitchen table and read the letter 4 times, trying to figure out how I felt about it. Part of me was happy that Madison Pierce finally appeared to realize what she had done wrong. Another part of me was still furious, upset, and concerned that this was simply another manipulation. I chose to react, but I wanted to be clear about my boundaries and expectations. I sent my own letter to Madison Pierce, saying I appreciated her apologies and was pleased she was getting therapy. I stated that I was willing to work on mending our connection, but I needed to witness continuous changes in behavior over time, not just beautiful words on paper. I made it quite plain that I will never pay her any type of child support, aunt tax, or any other fictitious cost she could propose in the future. I stated that any future connection would need her to accept my boundaries and my decisions about my own life without guilt or manipulation. I also informed her that my connection with Noah Pierce was important to me, and I hoped we could find a way to live as a family without all of the financial demands and stress. I wrote the letter the next day, feeling hopeful that things would finally improve, even if they would never be the same as before. I opted to wait a few weeks before contacting anyone on Madison Pierce's improvement. I wanted to know if her apology and assurances were genuine or simply another effort to manipulate the situation. Brooke Chandler texted me in late February, asking if I had heard from Madison Pierce recently. I told Brooke Chandler about the letter and my reaction, and she mentioned that she had been seeing Madison Pierce for coffee every Wednesday morning before work. Madison Pierce was truly attending her treatment visits and completing the tasks her therapist gave. Madison Pierce, according to Brooke Chandler, deleted her Instagram account and the Facebook app from her phone after her therapist helped her see how much time she wasted comparing herself to other people's faux, flawless lives. Madison Pierce was now using a basic budgeting tool and documenting every dollar she spent, which she admittedly found difficult at first because she had never paid attention to where her money went. Ethan Pierce had temporarily taken over their credit cards, and Madison Pierce was keeping cash envelopes for grocery and home expenditures so she could see how much money she had left each week. Brooke Chandler revealed that she was shocked Madison Pierce was staying with it since she anticipated Madison Pierce to drop out of therapy after a few sessions, just as she did with everything else that made her uncomfortable. I told Brooke Chandler I hoped Madison Pierce kept it up, but I wasn't ready to believe the improvements would continue. Mom contacted me the same week to inform me that she and Dad had attended one of Madison Pierce and Ethan Pierce's counseling sessions as guests. The therapist had requested Madison Pierce's permission to bring them so that they could learn about what Madison Pierce was working on, and how they might promote healthier family dynamics. Mom stated it was difficult to hear the therapist describe how she and her father had been encouraging Madison Pierce's conduct by constantly bailing her out financially, and smoothing over problems rather than allowing Madison Pierce to face repercussions. The therapist said that providing Madison Pierce money whenever she claimed to be struggling had kept her from learning to handle her own finances and make difficult decisions about priorities. Mom grieved as she realized that attempting to help Madison Pierce had actually harmed her capacity to mature and accept responsibility for her life. Dad was uncomfortable during the conversation but eventually conceded that the therapist was correct in accusing them of making excuses for Madison Pierce's terrible behavior. Mom stated that they had resolved to stop providing Madison Pierce money for anything other than real emergencies and to allow her to work through her issues without intervening to fix everything. Early April arrived, and Madison Pierce texted me asking if I wanted to see her for coffee on Saturday morning. My initial impulse was to say no since I was still upset and angry from all that had transpired. But I also realized that if I wanted to have a connection with Noah Pierce as he grew older, I needed to first see if Madison Pierce had changed. I texted back saying I'd meet her at the coffee shop near my flat at 9:30. I arrived 10 minutes early and sat at a table in the back corner where we could speak without being overheard. Madison Pierce strolled in just at 9:30, looking different than I had seen her in months. She was not wearing makeup, and her hair was tied back in a basic ponytail, rather than the groomed waves she typically spent an hour on. She was dressed in pants and a plain t-shirt, rather than the luxury outfits she used to insist on getting even when she claimed they couldn't afford groceries. She sat across from me and ordered an ordinary coffee instead of the $6.50 special drink she had every day. We sat in uneasy quiet for a minute before Madison Pierce began speaking. She explained that her therapist had helped her understand that her child's assistance needs stemmed from her feeling that she was failing as a mother in comparison to all the ideal moms she saw online. She'd been reading through social media for hours every day, admiring ladies who appeared to have it all together, with beautiful houses, perfect children, perfect faces, and ideal lifestyles. She began to believe that if she just dressed better, purchased the right things, and projected the correct image, she'd feel like a decent mother instead of drowning. She stated that she had been so preoccupied with seeming successful that she had ceased being present with Noah Pierce and attending to his needs. She stated that when she saw me living my life without children and having money to spend on whatever I wanted, she became furious and envious, rather than pleased for me. She had convinced herself that I owed her anything since I had decided not to go through the difficulties she was experiencing. Her therapist assisted her in seeing that she was attempting to control and punish me for living a different life rather than dealing with her own feelings about her decisions. I sat there listening to Madison Pierce, trying to figure out if this was genuine or another form of deceit. I told her I understood being overwhelmed by life's choices and comparing yourself to others. I answered, "Everyone struggles with feeling like they're not measuring up to some impossible standard." But I also informed her that attempting to make me pay for her mistakes would never work, and it had severely harmed our relationship. I said that I needed her to realize that I am Noah Pierce's aunt who adores him and wishes to spend time with him. But I am not a bank account from which she can withdraw anytime she is anxious about money. I told her that if we were to restore any type of connection, she needed to accept my boundaries and my decisions in my own life, without guilt trips, demands, or manipulation. Madison Pierce agreed and said that her therapist had been working with her to grasp the difference between asking for help correctly and making demands with threats attached. She stated that she was using Noah Pierce as a weapon to control me, which was improper and unjust to him. She claimed she was learning to articulate what she really wanted rather than causing drama and issuing ultimatums. We chatted for about 3 hours about how we could proceed. I made it quite plain that I would never pay her any type of child support, aunt tax, or any other fictitious cost, regardless of what she called it. I told her I was content to spend time with Noah Pierce and occasionally buy him gifts because I wanted to, not because I owed her anything. Madison Pierce concurred, saying she knew that presence and time with family could not be demanded or priced. We decided to begin carefully with family events in which other people were present and observe how things went before attempting to develop a stronger bond. It wasn't comfortable, and it wasn't what it used to be, but it seemed more genuine than our relationship had in years. Spring arrived, the weather warmed up, and life returned to normal for Madison Pierce. We saw each other at Mom and Dad's house for Sunday dinners, and we were courteous and civil, free of the continuous tension that had made every family gathering terrible for months. I started seeing Noah Pierce more frequently, picking him up on Saturday afternoons to go to the park, have ice cream, or simply hang around in my apartment playing games. Madison Pierce still had moments when I could see her old tendencies wanting to return. She'd make a joke about how lovely it must be to be able to purchase new furniture or how costly Noah Pierce's summer camp would be, but then she'd stop herself and apologize for making me feel bad about my money. Her therapist had evidently taught her to identify when she was reverting to previous ways and to stop herself before causing further damage to her relationships. Ethan Pierce informed me privately that things at home were better than they had been in years because Madison Pierce was talking about her feelings rather than spending money to escape them. Mom stated that she and her father were learning to let Madison Pierce deal with her own difficulties rather than constantly attempting to fix them for her. Our entire family realized that preserving the peace by tolerating poor conduct only made things worse over time. I witnessed Madison Pierce work hard in therapy and marital counseling to modify her tendencies, and I felt truly proud of her for doing something obviously tough and painful. Our relationship would never be the same as before all of this happened. We'd never be as close as we were when we were younger and fully trusted each other. But what we had now was healthier and more authentic than what we had previously, even if it was not as simple or pleasant. I learned that sometimes the best thing you can do for someone you care about is to refuse to participate in their dysfunction and let them deal with the repercussions of their actions. Madison Pierce discovered that attempting to control others while avoiding her own emotions only made her unhappy and harmed the connection she truly cared about. And Noah Pierce got to grow up witnessing the adults in his life work through difficult challenges and come out stronger on the other side, which seemed like a fairly significant lesson for a youngster too.